We will now take a look at the circle of Willis, which includes the cerebral arteries. So, this would be the dorsal view, and then we would flip the brain over to reveal the ventral surface. That would be the anterior section and the posterior section. So at the anterior end, we have the anterior cerebral arteries. And lateral to those would be the middle cerebral artery. The anterior cerebral artery and the middle cerebral artery are connected via the anterior communicating artery. And we could reveal the optic hiatus from back to see it. The most posterior artery is the basilar artery, which is at the base of the brain, and anterior to that would be the posterior cerebral artery. Running longitudinally and connecting the anterior and posterior cerebral arteries is the posterior communicating artery. The cerebral arteries together make the circle of Willis.
This is the dorsal view of the hippocampal cut in PhotoSeries 4. Anterior to the hippocampus, we have the ventricles, which are called lateral ventricles, which is the space in between the head of caudate. And interestingly, we can also see the septohypothalamic and septotubercular tracts, which is the white lining here. This is PhotoSeries 5, but because it's such a nice cut, you can actually see the lining in a very defined manner. And it surrounds the head of caudate, which is these two structures here. Anterior to the head of caudate, we have the genu of the corpus callosum. Lateral to the head of caudate, we have septum pellucidum. And posterior to the head of caudate, we have the dorsal fornix. Lifting up the hippocampus, we see, starting from the most anterior, we see the striata medullaris. Posterior to that, we have the habenula. Lateral to the habenula, we have the pulvinar. Ventral to the pulvinar, we have the lateral geniculate body. And posterior to the lateral geniculate body, we have the ventral geniculate body. Interestingly, if you flip it over, we can see that the optic tracts actually continues into the lateral geniculate body, which also in turn continues into the pulvinar. Dorsal to the pulvinar, we see the superior colliculi, which has a role in vision, as well as, though it's missing here, there's supposed to be a structure called the pinot body in this hole here. And Eileen will talk about the nucleus and the hippocampus.
So posterior to the inferior colliculus is the floor of the fourth ventricle, which is revealed after the cerebellum is removed. At the most posterior area of the fourth ventricle floor, we are able to locate a group of nuclei. However, the best way to locate the nuclei is to start from the most posterior part, which is the obex. The obex is the endpoint of the fourth ventricle. Moving directly anterior to the obex, we have the gracile nucleus. Anterior to that, we have the cuneate nucleus. Moving down lower, we have the vagal nucleus, and in the middle of the fourth ventricle floor, we have a small bump on both sides. These are the vestibular nuclei. As mentioned earlier, this is the hippocampus. When flipping the hippocampus, we see the ventral structure of the hippocampus. When flipped, this is the most anterior part, and this is the most posterior part. Starting from the anterior structure, we see this white band of matter. This is the fimbria. Moving posterior to the fimbria, we have the dentate gyres. And then posterior to that, we have the deep groove of hippocampal fissure. And that concludes the photo series.